Sam, I want to try and dovetail this into basketball a little bit here
Mhm.
because as we've watched over the course of the past couple years, really under Fred Hoiberg, I'm curious with the commitment to the basketball Nebraska has and who they've got in place right now. Like, what kind of program do you think Nebraska basketball should want to be?
I think that annually making the NCAA tournament and occasionally making a run in the NCAA tournament is the kind of program that Nebraska can naturally aspire to be. And I think that's, you're not necessarily going to make it every year. You know, out of 6 years, you make it 4, that kind of thing. And, you know, out of those 4 years that you make it, maybe in 2, you're winning at least 1 game, and maybe in 1 or 2, you're making a run to the second weekend. But that's basically what I think the program ought to be. I think that's a reasonable expectation. Creighton's expectations are a little higher. Obviously, they're making the tournament every year now, and they basically expect to make a second weekend run, even if this year it might be a little tougher. So, you know, I think Nebraska can be a little just a rung below that, and that's more than fair. And quite honestly, I think that's kind of, I mean, I think Hoiberg wants to make the tournament every year. He's very competitive. I think people don't want to hear it. I really think he coached the team up this year in a lot of ways. They lack the athleticism of some of the other Big Ten teams. They lack the shooting. So when you lack athleticism, there's certain things defensively that are hard to do. And when you lack the shooting, there's certain things offensively you're not very good at. And so how do you win games? Well, I think Hoiberg's done a pretty good job. He needs to have a conversation with Fred Hoiberg, the GM. And the GM, Fred Hoiberg, may need to have a conversation with boosters or whomever in order to get the players in the program that they absolutely need. Because I feel like when Nebraska took the floor for much of this season, guys, in Big Ten play, they didn't seem to have as athletic or as good shooting of players as their opponents. And that includes Minnesota or a bunch of other teams. So, like, that's the area where I think Nebraska needs to improve.
So, okay, in this day and age, Sam, how fair or foul is it to separate the two when we talk coach GM? Because all of a sudden, the last handful of weeks, you know, we hear about NIL money and what's being spent, and people have inflated some numbers on what a couple of players at Nebraska are making or they think they're making, and it's like, oh, there's not this, whatever, right? You know the narratives that are out there. How do we separate that, in your opinion, from a guy that right now is that we think is a pretty good coach that's 37 and 79 in the conference?
Well, I at the collegiate level, those are often one and the same. So, you know, in football, that's beginning to change in college football, but in basketball, it's roughly the same. Fred basically had a GM for the first 3 years he was here. Now, Matt Abdelmassih was technically an assistant coach, but he was doing a lot of the talent acquisition and you know, roster formation. And that didn't go very well. So now I think, you know, it does come down to, okay, who are the players that you have in the program? What do you like about them? Do they fit your vision? I think in terms of character, they do. I think they're tough and gritty and scrappy and all of those things. And so I think they're getting those kind of players. I think you just want to be able to, you know, supplement the toughness and the grittiness with a little bit better athleticism and a little bit more shooting. Like I said, I think you have to, a Fred Hoiberg team should be able to shoot the basketball. And only one of his 6 teams at Nebraska have been able to do that. So I think, you know, it's hard to separate the two because, you know, there aren't many collegiate basketball GMs. North Carolina's getting one, a few others. Anybody who's a North Carolina fan, and I know, Damon, you are, when you watch North Carolina and Duke, the 2 times they played, the difference in the rosters was stark. Like the athleticism and the quality of players. And, well, you know, growing up as a kid, that was never true. The teams were pretty much equal on that front. But when you look at Duke now and you look at North Carolina, this most recent season, you understand why they're getting a GM, because they're like, you guys probably need to have somebody who can help you acquire elite talent so that you can match up with elite talent from Duke. And so maybe Nebraska needs that GM. I don't know. But the reality is, I don't think Nebraska matches up with North Carolina's talent. I think Nebraska is struggling to match up with, the top 6 players at Minnesota. And so I think they just need to choose better to some degree. And if you want to talk resources and NIL money and things like that, well, I think that's a reasonable conversation. But remember, revenue sharing is one thing. NIL is another. And NIL is largely dependent on boosters, and that to some degree is dependent on the coach. Like Matt Rule works his tail off to raise money. Mm-hmm. I think most people who are around Creighton basketball would tell you that Greg McDermott does the same. I assume that Fred Hoiberg's doing that. But Fred's probably got to go out and get a whale and convince a whale, listen, man, we need a little bit extra here so we can go get this guy here. And in getting that guy there, maybe we can be the kind of program that we want to be. And I would say at the point guard spot, that's a key spot, because I think they haven't been quite as good there as maybe they would have hoped they would have been. And that's an area where maybe if you can go out and get a slightly better player, you might be able to get over the top.
Sam, so you brought up several things there with sort of the player acquisition chain of events, right? Where, if you had to nail it down, is Nebraska missing, right? Is it on the talent eval on the front end? Is it on the resources to acquire these players? Is it on just players not wanting to come to Nebraska? Like, where is it falling apart in that chain where, let's assume you're right, that Nebraska is having a hard time matching up with the roster of like a Minnesota, even not even talking about the top of the league necessarily?
Well, I'll try to talk about roster construction here for a second. I had a really interesting conversation with our beat writer, Wilson Moore, last week. And Wilson pointed out that when he talked to Andrew Morgan over the summer, Andrew kind of told him, well, they showed me a lot of clips of Rink Mast. I'm going to kind of come in and do what Rink was doing. Because remember, Rink is coming back, but he's hurt this year. Mm-hmm. And so they couldn't go out and get like a 4-year guy for the Rink role. They had to go get a 1-year guy. And I think they settled on Andrew Morgan. And then Wilson noted, Morgan didn't do a lot of that. He played in the post. Well, some of it is by saying, okay, Rink, you're going to come back, they almost limited themselves in a way. They were like, well, we need to go out and get a guy who's like Rink, but he can't stay here for more than a year because Rink's coming back. And so that was one thing. Like that was challenging. They kind of hamstrung themselves a little bit there. So Rink's going to come back, and that will help them, because he will do some of the things in that offense that Fred believes in and wants to do. I think the second thing is you have to kind of decide, okay, do you want to be a team that continues to play the defense that you're playing, where you're doubling the post and you're rotating out and covering threes? Or do you want to have a lineup where you can put a defender out there and he can play a center kind of straight up and do better, do pretty well, right? Do fairly well with that. Now, anytime you play a center straight up, the opposing center is going to score more points. That's just life. But you want to do it relatively so that it makes sense and you're doing the right things. Can they go find a guy like that? And then I think they have to decide. I think Hoiberg has to. I don't know. I think Fred thinks he can fix shooters that have struggled in other places for a couple of years, and I just don't know that he can. And it's not because I don't think he's good at what he does. Connor Essegian came to Nebraska and he could shoot. Some of these other guys, were not good shooters from the schools they left, and they didn't get better when they came to Nebraska. And so I think some of it is you got to go out and get the right shooters. Fred's been on those guys. He tried to get Antonio Reeves from Illinois State, and he signed with Kentucky. He tried to get Baylor Shireman from South Dakota, and he signed with Creighton. Tried to get John Tonji out of Colorado State. He signed with Missouri. I don't know that Nebraska tried again because nobody knew that John Tonji was going to do this.
Yeah, he made a run at Hunter Salas. Made a run at St. Thomas.
Made a run at Hunter.
A little
Hunter's a better all-around player, and not just a pure shooter. But yes, of course, he made a run at Hunter Salas. He made a run at Latrell Wrightsell Jr. He didn't get it. so along the way, they've tried to make the effort to go out and get a guy that can score and fill it up. And again, Hunter's a little bit more versatile player, especially on defense. So Hunter's a better defender than some of the players that we mentioned. But on some level, you have to land on one of those guys, and I think they've settled is the wrong word. I think they've went after the next guy that once they don't get the guy they want, and so there's that. And then there's we like who Rink is, so we're going to let him rehab here for a year, and then we'll come back to him. Well, that limits you a little because basically you're saying we got to go out and get a 1-year guy, and then that guy did not really turn out to do the things that Rink Math did last year. So I think they were a little hamstrung there, and they will be better at that next year because he'll be on the floor.
Let me ask you something, Sam. Coach Rule has tried to kind of talk about bucking this curse, and it's not this, and it's not that. It's not the uniforms. It's not, we need to be better. We need to worry about football. And for Nebraska basketball fans who are, struggling through just trying to get a tournament win, right? They see what's happening at Creighton. They saw this year from Omaha. What's different, or how would you explain, if I wanted to get off this whole, we're never going to be this and this doom and gloom, what makes a year like this different in terms of level of disappointment versus like 2018 or 2019, the year after they were 13-5 in the conference, remember, and they didn't really have the quality wins and they didn't get in. And guys like Palmer Jr. and Copeland and Roby and Watson, like that team kind of fell flat. That's different than what happened this year, isn't it? Or is it just simply a Nebraska basketball thing? Because you're trying to shake that across the board. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Help me with that.
That season, Miles' final season was obviously disappointing and had kind of an uplift at the end in the Big Ten tournaments, and they won a game in the NIT. One of the challenges with the end of the Miles era is that it was the end of the Miles era, and some of that was because Bill Moose was ready to move on, and Fred Hoiberg was out there available to hire, much like Scott Frost. And Scott Frost wasn't available, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I think some of what happened during Miles' final season, especially after Copeland gets hurt, he got hurt in the Ohio State game, and then after that they go on a losing streak. It was just pressure. I think it was everybody kind of knew that they had to make the NCAA tournament, or they were gonna, or Miles was out. He only got a 1-year contract extension. He got a 1-year contract extension off of a 22-11 season. Fred got a 4-year contract extension off of a 23-11 season. So the writing was on the wall for Miles, and everybody kind of knew that things were going to be a little rough and tumble in that final year. And people don't remember this maybe, but there was that big flare up with Tim Miles trying to hire the sports psychologist on his own, and then Nebraska saying they had their own sports psychologist, and this whole
that's happened in another sport too. It seems to be a thing. Although not anymore, but
right. So, there was a lot going on. And so I think what makes this season a little bit different is that, Fred's obviously wasn't on the hot seat. He was, had all the momentum in the world. PBA is jam-packed with fans. And the team was 17-10 and just basically needed to win 2 or 3 more games to make the NCAA tournament. And they only need to win 1 to make the Big Ten tournament. So the fact that they didn't make either one, I think, is really deflating and disappointing. And again, Hoiberg is pretty good at staying with the coach speak and kind of staying on message. But I think his level of disappointment is probably off the charts. And he doesn't necessarily convey that per se. I mean, he'll break a whiteboard with his hand or cut his hand or whatever. But he doesn't necessarily, get in a press conference and rant like Mick Cronin. Maybe it would help if he did. I don't know. All I can tell you is that I think he's really frustrated with not getting it done this year. And, the fans, I don't know how much the fans do or don't feel that. You look at the message boards, and they're not thrilled with it. And it doesn't, the football program, everybody kind of knows that's a slow runway, and everybody knows that Big Ten football is a bear now. Like, this isn't what Bo came into. God bless it. 2011. This isn't that anymore. So Big Ten football is a bear. Winning nine games in the Big Ten era right now is a real achievement. But baseball's not going very well right now. That's frustrating. So there's just a little bit of discontent with men's sports. Women's sports doing great, and have generally done much better than the men's sports since joining the Big Ten. I think that's a theme that's probably worth exploring a little bit as to why the women's sports, including basketball, especially basketball, has so greatly outperformed the men's side since joining the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's interesting. And knowing both of them pretty well, obviously I know Amy a little bit better, and longer. Don't you still think that both programs reflect their coach's temperament? Or is that too linear?
I think that the team that Amy has now, I don't know. I mean, maybe she wouldn't say this. I think this might be her favorite team she's had. So yeah, and there's reasons for that. There's reasons. A lot of those players stayed. They just fit what she wants. I think. I don't know that every team she's had, even a couple of good teams, necessarily did that, but this one does. And I think I think one of the things I would say of Hoiberg is that he was pretty steely as a player, and yeah, he had his up and down moments as he's described before. But you got to have a guy that can just go out there and nail shots, and I do feel like they've lacked that. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for the way that Nebraska's men play, and they play hard. It just, I think you can tell they're missing a player or two. And so the offseason conversation is going to be about, how much grace and how much patience do fans have? Are they going to buy season tickets? I mean, buying this guy out is very unlikely, folks. It's a lot of money. I think to buy him out right now would be more money than it costs to buy out Scott Frost. So, I think Fred Hoiberg and Nebraska are a marriage, and it's going to last. So, I think there's a sense of frustration perhaps about that, but they need to make this thing work with him, and we'll, I guess they're going to the Crown. I hope they play in the NIT and not the Crown. That's my opinion. That's my 2 cents.
Because
it's 3 weeks away.
Yeah.
I mean, the Crown starts on March 31st. That's a long time to sit around and that's like a bowl season, and that's just a long time to sit around and wait for a postseason tournament. But wait to play Villanova. That's the Crown, for people who don't know. It's going to have 2 teams each from the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Big East, at least, and then they're going to populate it with other teams. And it could be more Big Ten and Big 12 and Big East teams. So we don't really know exactly how many teams will end up there. It could be Georgetown, Villanova, and Xavier if they don't make the NCAA tournament. I don't know. It's a long time to wait to play, those teams. And go through the whole rigmarole of going to Vegas for a week. That just feels like a lot of process to go through. I don't know that Nebraska has a choice. I don't really know how the contract works. So, but they're going to play in some postseason. I suspect they would prefer it was the NIT, because then they can start playing next week. Next week. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they'll figure out what they're going to do, and then they've got to get right on the transfer portal. They'll start adding players to the program in April, I would assume.
Hey, let me get you out of here on this, Sam. I'm going to play quick word association. You ready?
Yes.
Brice Williams.
One of the best Husker of the Big Ten era.
Huh. Okay. That's Is that 12 years?
Yeah.
It was Petaway. Now I think it's Brice. The Petaway was a better defender, but I think it's Brice. He got the scoring record. Yep. He'll be first team All-Big Ten, I think, this year. Yep.
If he does, that's a heck of an accomplishment to make all first team All-Big Ten this year.
Yeah, you know what's going to happen is you're going to have two guys from Purdue on the team, and they finish four games behind the Big Ten champions. And the Big Ten champions, Michigan State, and they're not going to have a player on the first team. Makes a lot of sense. That's what's going to happen. It's what everybody says they're going to vote for. Well,
I know, and I think Braden Smith, and I think Braden Smith is going to be Player of the Year.
Yeah, that's okay. I can live with that. I think Braden Smith would be even better at Michigan State. But the point being, the other guy who has had a wonderful season, did it occur to anybody that maybe he's compiled the stats he has because he's got the best point guard in the country? And they have one of the best shooters in the country? Like, he's the third best player on the team.
Yeah.
But anyway, obviously Michigan State's doing it with just 9 yeomen and Tom Izzo is a wizard, I guess. I don't know. I've even heard, well, Izzo's not going to win Coach of the Year. Well, what are they supposed to do there? Do they get best fan base of the year? Like, what do they get for winning the Big Ten by dominantly?
Yeah, he should be Big Ten Coach of the Year.
Oh, he will be, I think. But I've heard arguments for, I don't know. Willard. I'm like, oh, really? I don't know. I don't think so. Greg Gard. No, not Greg Gard. No.
Oh, I
Come
love
on.
it. Yeah, excited.
He doesn't have a first team they don't have a first team All Big Ten guy. They're not very good.
Excited okay. Sam is the best, Sam. Appreciate it, Sam.
Sam, I just Googled something real quick. I think they get a trophy for it in the Big Ten still. So
there you go.
That's all they Sam,
best fan base, best student section, best uniforms. They have great uniforms. They're the best uniforms.
They're going to get the sportsmanship award.
Sam, there you go. They probably, I don't know if they'll get that.
Not after yesterday.
They do have the best uniforms. Yeah. They have the best uniforms in the league for sure.
Sam, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep.
Thanks, Sam.